Hello friends, welcome to UGC EPG Pathshala. Myself Taruna Bansal, Assistant Professor at the Department of Geography, Jamia Millia Islamia. Today I will be speaking on the process of urbanization in India, a colonial legacy and the post-independence characteristics. This module is part of the paper Urban Geography. Now, the main objective of discussing the process of urbanization in India in two perspectives is that if you actually analyze, if you actually study urbanization in India, you will see that we have certain colonial imprints even today in our cities. And myself being since I am from Calcutta, I can tell you that most of the buildings, even today, most of the buildings have a British imprint, and even the way we perceive urban, even the way Louis Wirth in his monumental work, which says urbanism as a way of life, says it is there in those cities which are colonial in nature. So my main objective of taking these two periods together was to see how the colonial legacy, how the urbanization during the colonial period had influenced, has impacted, as well as affected the characteristics of urbanization in India after the post-independence period, that is 1947. Now, I'll start with to say that the learned objectives will be such. First, we'll see what do I mean by urbanization, how do we define urban areas, and what is the definition used in India to define urban areas, and then we'll come to the urbanization trends, and then maybe what are the characteristics of colonial period and that of post-independence period, and what are the patterns of urbanization in India, and then finally we'll come to the conclusion. Now here I would like to make one thing sure, that I have not done the interstate analysis. The entire module is only on India as a whole. I am doing this not on the meso level, that in Kerala we have more urbanization, in Bihar we have low. No, I have not done this in that perspective. I have done this as a region, India as the region. Now, to start with urbanization, the spatial dimension of the industrial and technological revolution of the past 2 centuries has attracted the attention of scholars, social reformers and politicians since about the middle of the 19th century. Urbanization on one hand deals with the study of cities and city systems, while on the other hand is the distinction between the studies of urbanization. Urbanization is a phenomenon describing a process of change in the sites of the population due to the changing condition in society at large. Its studies entails an examination of the factors which start and sustain this process, as well as of its implication in broader general terms. In contrast, the study of cities and the city life focuses on the product of the change introduced by the urbanization in a localized context, regardless of the size of the urban system under study. One could suggest that the study of urbanization represents the macro level, and the study of cities and urban affairs the micro level of the interrelated phenomenon along a continuum, rather than a single or two separate phenomenon. Demographically speaking, the level of urbanization is measured by the percentage of population living in urban areas. India shares most characteristic features of urbanization in the developing countries. In India, according to 2011 census, urbanization has increased faster than expected. This has reversed the declining trend in the growth rate of urban population, which was being observed in the 90s and 80s. Also, for the first time since independence, the absolute increase in the urban population was higher than that in the rural population. Number of urban agglomerations have grown from 1827 in 1901 to 7935 in 2011. Number of the total population has increased from 23.84 crores in 1901 to 121.7 crores in 2011, whereas number of population residing in urban areas has increased from 2.58 crores in 1901 to 37.71 crores in 2011. It reflects a gradual increasing trend in urbanization. India as India can be said to be at the acceleration stage of process of urbanization. The trends of urbanization which are experienced, have been discussed in the next few sections, but before that one has to understand the concept of urbanization in urban areas. Since the inclusion of the notion of modernization into the concept of development, cultural anthropologists and psychologists and other behavioral scientists have expanded the interdisciplinary search for an improved understanding of urbanization and its impact on society. Urbanization is the field studied by all social scientists, and we can have three interpretations of urbanization: behavioral, structural, demographical, which can also be related to geographical. Behavioral, the first one is the study of urbanization in 1938, where Louis Wirth in his paper Urbanism, a Way of Life, he said that all the urban studies were denoted to city level studies, and it was very quantifiable work where they were measuring certain dimensions of the cities. That of cities is not enough. There should exist a theory of cities which should be based on the behavior of social groups. There are three things within the city which affect the social groups: size, density, and diversification. Now we come to the second definition, which is a structural definition. Urbanization is the process where agricultural communities are transformed into industrial communities, and because all the industrial communities live in urban areas, it is also a process of urbanization. This is a result of industrialization and economic development, so that they are trying to see how occupational structure takes place, rather how it changes from agriculture to non-agriculture. Now we come to the demographic definition, which says that rural settlements are being transformed into urban settlements, so that they try to understand this from the point of view of migration, thus deals with population mobility. Now, it may also happen that urbanization takes place as a result of growth of individual towns, multiplication of towns. Now here, this particular concept of multiplication of towns, because the spatial extent is increasing, we can say that the conception of urbanization is somewhat related to geographical explanation, which says that we have to study the spatial analysis to understand all the different phenomena in space and their distribution. In very simple words, urbanization can be defined as a process which reveals itself through temporal, spatial, and sectoral changes, where in demographic, social, economic, technological, and environmental aspects of life in a given society. Urbanization is a progressive concentration of population in urban unit. In order to have a better understanding of the urbanization in India, it would be appropriate to examine which settlements are treated as urban by the Census of India. There is no standard definition of urban, and it varies from country to country, as said by United Nations in 2009. But in India, these areas which are categorized, which are said to be urban, are defined on the basis of two criteria. First, the state government grants municipal status like corporation, municipal council, notified town area committee, or Nagar Panchayat to a settlement. Such settlements are known as statutory or municipal towns in the census definition of urban areas. Second, if a settlement does not have an urban civic status but satisfies demographic and economic criteria, like it has a population more than 5,000, density of 400 persons per square kilometer, and 75% of its male working population engaged in non-agricultural sector. Now, if any of these three criteria are satisfied by a settlement, it is declared to be urban. So now see, we have understood that urbanization as a process can be behavioral, can be spatial, can be geographical, can be demographic, and even when we are defining urban, we are taking these into considerations, because if I say that the population is more than 5,000, that means it is demographical. Density is more, that means there has to be certain facilities, there have to be certain agglomeration economies that people are being pull towards that particular unit, and all these facets are included when we declare any place an urban. So we come to the next session when we discuss urbanization in India, a colonial legacy, and how it affects. The story of urbanization in India needs to be studied in an historical context, a story of spatial and temporal discontinuity. Ramachandran says the earliest urban developments were confined to the Indus Valley and its adjoining regions. Other parts of the countries were totally untouched by this process. In the early historical period, it was experienced mainly in Middle Ganga Plains and some parts of the Indian peninsula at its southern tip. Similar picture has been seen in the historical period when larger parts of the country were hardly affected by urbanization. In modern times too, these spatial discontinuities were characteristics of this process which when it occurred in India. Now the factors which was responsible for these spatial discontinuities were not same. Now you may even ask me, how can you say that? No, it was not same because we see examples, we have examples where we see that these factors have been different from time to time as well as from place to place. In the prehistoric period, urbanization was synonym to the origin and rise of civilization. This can be termed as a cultural process. From historical periods to the British regime, urbanization was related to the rise and fall of kingdoms, dynasties and empires, thus basically a political process. But in modern times, it is perceived as a process which is closely related to an economic development and industrialization of that particular process. So it becomes an economic process. On the basis of these temporal discontinuities, the urban history of India can be divided into 5 time periods. So the first one is the prehistoric period, then we have the early historic period, then the medieval period, the British period, and finally the post-independence period. Now you can, in detail, if you want to read about the prehistoric, the historic and the medieval period, you can see the book written by Professor Ramachandran which says urbanization and urban systems in India. Here what I have done is I have just concentrated on the British period and post-independence period, as I already mentioned that I as a geographer perceive that the post-independence characteristics have a colonial legacy, have colonial imprints in the process which is being there. So I have just concentrated on these 2 parts. So we start with the British period. Now before going to British period, I would just like to say one thing, that in post-independence period, the entire process can be summarized in 2 words, that is metropolization and suburbanization. That means the top has become heavy. When the top has become heavy, so it will it will fall down. So the urbanization what we are experiencing in India today is basically lopsided. If the census categorizes urban settlements into 6 categories starting from class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 simply on the basis of population. The class 6 has population of more than 5,000 to 9,999. So when the class 5 has population from 10,000 to 19,999. Class 3 population is from 20,000 to 49,999. Class 2 is from 50,000 to 5 times 9. There is just one less than 1 lakh. And class 1 population is more than 1 lakh population. Now if you simply see the data, you just have to simply see the data, you see that a huge percentage of population is concentrated in these class 1 cities, and that too in metropolitan. Now here from metropolitan, I simply mean I'm not going into the process what is metropolization and how it leads to a cosmopolitan nature of the city. No, I'm not dealing with them. The only definition here for a metropolitan city is a city which has a population of more than 1 billion. So if you see urbanization in post-independence period, you will see that the number of million cities has continuously increased. The proportion of urban population living in class 1 cities has increased. Now why has this happened? Why is it so that the small and medium towns have not developed or have not established themselves as important urban centers? Now the answers to these problems from my point of view are there in the in the colonial period, which shows why this lopsided urbanization occurred in our country. Now we come to the British period, which is around 150 years, that is from 1800 to 1947. Now if we say, you know, British had a negative impact on the Indian urban morphology, as the pre-British cities were on decline, as the Britishers were hardly interested in the traditional industries of India. Moreover, the introduction of railways resulted in the diversion of trade routes into different channels, as every railway station became a point of export of material for its hinterland, thus depriving other earlier trade centers their monopoly. Whatever the reason may be, it can be said that India's urban landscape went through a transformation during the 150 years of the British regime. So, you know, what we see that there were two main factors or two main features of this particular British rule. One is that they were hardly bothered, you know, that what are traditional industries, but because we were a colony. So, you know, the main aim of Britishers as colonizers was to extract as many as raw materials from India, which were being exported to England for final production. So one thing is that they were not bothered where our traditional industry is or what our traditional industry is. So the cities which were earlier there were hardly even looked after or hardly even taken care of. Secondly, railways was introduced. Now again, you know, we will be like, oh, why I am saying that railways were negative impact, but railways was in negative impact because it, you know, it opened up the virgin lands for the Britishers. Now if railways would not have been introduced, maybe the resources which were in the interior parts of the country they would not have reached to those resources. So now what happened, for the railways, a railway station was important. So the railway station became the primary foci. So the centers, the urban centers which were there before the Britishers started losing their monopoly. But I'll discuss this when I discuss the 5 features which are there of urbanization during the British period. So the first is the creation of the 3 metropolitan port cities which emerged as the leading colonial cities of the world. Now which are these? Naturally, Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. All the older cities which were prominent in the Mughal period were reduced to small towns. These 3 cities became the leading administrative, commercial and industrial cities, and the entire cultural landscape of these cities was of British taste, which was of sharp contrast to urban design of the Mughal periods. Now when we say this, you see, if you visit these cities, there are a number of buildings which are still of British architect. So what they did, they were, you know, imposing the British culture through the urban architect, and it was somewhere, it gave rise to, which I'll when I conclude this portion, you see, gave rise to something called urban elite, which was highly influenced by westernization, and this has led to the gap between the, you know, big cities and the small cities. And it is very common. I belong to Calcutta and Delhi, so, you know, if somebody tells me, are you from a smaller town, supposedly somebody says, are you from Muzaffarnagar, I will, oh no, how dare you. Now, for me, urbanism has become a way of life, and this is the result of the colonial legacy which we have got from the Britishers. Second important, you know, characteristic was creation of hill stations in the Himalayan foothills as well as in the South India. Now why is this important? Britishers traditionally from England. England is located in higher latitude, so the temperature is not as, you know, as hot as it is in India, because we are in a tropical and subtropical region of the world. So now they were not you know, comfortable in be it Bombay or Calcutta or in Delhi or even in Madras. Now, so as a result, they introduced the concept of hill stations. Now, and it's very interesting, when these hill stations came up, they even introduced tea and coffee plantations. Now, as a result, large number of smaller settlements cropped up, which had distinct characteristics, which were urban. Now, it is said that between 1815 and 1870, over 80 hill stations were developed in 4 different regions of the country to serve these 4 metropolitan cities of Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. These were Shimla, Mussoorie, Nainital near Delhi, Darjeeling, Shillong near Calcutta, Mahabaleshwar near Bombay, and the Nilgiri Kodaikanal area near Madras. And the second important aspect was the plantation settlements. Now, as we were colony, so tea and coffee plantations came, and this also came in resulted into urban settlements, because although they were not very large in size, they had distinct urban features because they were processing plants, residences of workers, as well as associated commercial establishments. And you'll see most of the places in these hill stations where the plantations are also there, there's always a big bungalow known as dak bungalow. So Britishers made things for themselves, but indirectly it was influencing the entire urban morphology of the country. Now the third important feature is the modification of the existing urban landscape through the introduction of civil lines and cantonments. Now this is very interesting to see that the administrative centers of Britishers, which was basically provincial capitals, district headquarters, or the tehsil level urban administrative towns, there these civil lines were added. And what was the purpose of these civil lines? These civil lines were very different from the residential areas of the Indians. Now these are basically administrative centers, they had courts, and significantly the residences of the officers. So again a segregation was done, that this is a British part of the city and this is the Indian part of the city. And similarly, we have cantonments. Now cantonments were, although they were fewer than these civil lines, they were built exclusively for British officers and army men. Now these modifications segregated the city and broadened the gap between rural and urban. For next is, as I already stated, introduction of railways and the modern industry, and this led to the development of new industrial townships like Jamshedpur, Asansol and Dhanbad. Now introduction of railways had an indirect influence, as I said, though it led to the emergence of metropolitan cities, it even brought unplanned urbanization as the city started growing in an unplanned manner towards the railway station. Industrial development as such during this period was very modest. They were hardly bothered to start new industries, but then we have exceptions like Jamshedpur, which emerged as urban areas because of the opening of the iron and steel industry. So the next is improvement in urban amenities and administration during this time. The facilities like piped water supply, street lighting, domestic electrification, sewage system, shopping areas, green spaces were roped in, but again they were restricted to the civil areas and the cantonment areas. Now most of the cities, other cities were deprived. Municipal city bodies were set up in 1881, but again they were concentrated only to the places where Britishers were living. So what we see is that the urbanization which occurred during the British period clearly brought segregation within the society. Now this became more apparent because educational institutions in the form of schools and colleges were established. Now they were the seats where this urban elite was, was being developed, and this elite was soaked in westernization, and they were hardly able to relate themselves to the rural India or the Indians which were not into the Western education system. So we see that the segregation which is there today in urban and rural areas or in the planned and unplanned cities, we see that this has its roots in the colonial period, and that those differences which occurred in the colonial period have plagued the social and political system of India, which can be clearly seen or is clearly visible in the blueprints of the cities which are there in the present times. So now we come to the post-independence period, that is what happened, how the scenario changed, or what was the scenario which emerged after 1947. Now the process of urbanization in the post-independence period witnessed a new phase. It was characterized with rapid urbanization, which was dominated with the mushrooming of 1 lakh and million plus cities. As I already said, the major changes that India witnessed can be summarized as follows. Now, why this happened? Influx of refugees and their settlement in the urban areas in the northern part of the country. Delhi is a classical example. The establishment of new planned administrative centers like Chandigarh and Bhubaneswar, construction of new industrial cities and new industrial townships near major cities, rapid growth of 1 lakh and million cities, stagnation in this, and in some cases the decline of small towns, the proliferation of slums and squatter settlements in the big cities, which even led to the emergence of urban rural fringe, the introduction of urban planning through 5-year plans, and the improvement in urban governance through 74th Amendment Act. Now, the process of urbanization in India is not at all different from other developing countries. It is also characterized with uneven pattern of development of small towns and big cities. According to 2011 census, the urban population grew to 377 million, showing a growth rate of 2.76 per annum during 2001-11. The level of urbanization in the country as a whole increased from 27.7% in 2001 to 31.6% in 2011, an increase of 3.3 percentage points during 2001 to 11 compared to the increase of 2.1 percentage points during 91 to 2001. It may be noted that the Indian economy has grown about 6% per annum during 90s to about 8% during the first decade of 2000. This clearly reflects that the power of economic growth is bringing about faster urbanization in 2001 and 11. Thus, in recent years, urbanization has more acted as an economic process than a social or political one. The levels of urbanization and the patterns are discussed in the next section. Now, when we say trends of urbanization, here what I have tried to discuss is the pattern of urbanization from 1901 to 2011, that how like even in the colonial period and after colonial period, that is in post-independence period, it has been. And this I have tried to show through the number of towns which has increased. Now, simply you can understand that it has increased from 1827 in 1901 to 7,935 in 2011, which clearly shows that urban population is increasing. Now, here Professor Kundu, I'll just you can see the data, you can see the text as it's there, but what I would like to tell is that as Professor Kundu here says that when people are talking of over urbanization, or that we are experiencing rapid urbanization, is it so? No, he defies this concept, he defies this theory. He says that India is not going through over urbanization. The only thing which is occurring is multiplication. That means towns are coming up because we have some problems with the definition, number one. Secondly, the population base of city is huge. So, even 1% increase or 1% growth rate will lead to a large number. Secondly, what we need to see is that in 2011, we see again an increasing trend. In 80s and 90s, as I already said, there was a decreasing trend. So, Professor Kundu says that there is no concept of over-urbanization. But in 2011, again, we are having an increasing trend. So, even the, exponential growth rate per annum has increased. And whatever you see, even if you see the proportion of population staying in metropolitan cities, in class 1 cities, these all has mushroomed, this all has been large. Now, why is that? Because this entire thing, this lopsided urbanization is the result of is the result of urbanization that took place in colonial period. Now, in colonial period, the entire focus were on the 3 cities, and these 3 cities had their spread effects, but to a limited extent. And moreover, because it was there that these cities will provide amenities. These cities will provide amenities. What will happen? There was a huge influx of migrants also. So, the fast so what is the what is the reason behind this lopsided urbanization? One, the faster demographic growth within these cities. Secondly, the number of million cities has increased. You know, it has been claimed that in 1901 only 6% of urban population was urban, but today we have nearly 42.6% population which is in million cities. We have 53 million cities, and so naturally the urbanization process in India has become top heavy. Now this is again shown in the data which is given. Now this says that the hierarchy of urban settlement and spatial structure which is there in today even prevailed during the colonial period, and this is basically, you know, the result of the imperialistic regime. The colonial economy generated strong commodity and population flows towards the key ports and administrative towns. As a result, it weakened the regional centripetal forces which were established during the medieval period. So, you know, there was this mismatch between the linkages, the inter-settlement linkages and bi-directional movement of goods and services between the core and periphery was not there. As a result, only these four major agglomerations, you know, became the prominent urban centers and resulted into this top-heavy urbanization. Now, to conclude, I would just say that as the topic of the module says that, you know, we are studying the process of urbanization in India through its colonial legacy. The present scenario is actually a product of of colonial period. It is not that, you know, suddenly we have achieved economic development and urban and then urbanization became a economic process. No, it is not so. It is just a result of the colonial imprint or the colonial influence which has led to the this particular lopsided urbanization in India. Therefore, today our urbanization is characterized with by dualism. First, the developed states have attracted population, and that is because they have certain amenities which are there. There are number of new industrial townships, but the backward states have remained backward, and you know, this can, and somewhere the government investment is also responsible for this. Secondly, a large part of rural urban migration into smaller towns have been very less. Now, and it has only been from its immediate hinterland, and if people are basically migrating from rural areas to large cities rather than coming to the smaller towns, they are coming to the large cities. As a result, the smaller towns in these backward places, in these backward states have stagnated. So a new paradigm needs to be looked into to see how how this regional disparity in the process of urbanization can be looked into, so that you know, there can be somewhat somewhat role of regional development be there, and these urban centers are able to diffuse positive effects in its hinterland and even across. In my viewpoint, the concept of urban corridors or conurbations may be one of the solutions to this problem, but then also it has to be looked into a point that these corridors take local conditions into consideration. Thank you.